The federal agent could do anything to you, absolutely anything, and there would be no one who could stop them.
No! Shame! Shame! Oh my...
This sort of sense, this conscious cultivation of this attitude, this disposition, that is what fascism is built on. Whenever we veer into this sort of territory where we're making fear the intentional policy of federal agency of the United States government, that's striking. That's scary stuff.
Oh, go back.
I've never talked to people who are afraid in the way that they're afraid.
You are impeding operations. This is the United States federal government.
Over here.
There is absolutely no one coming to save us. There's no one coming to save these people. There's no one going to stand up for them except for the people who are here right now who care.
What's happening here? It's torture! What they're doing is torture! You're gonna brutalize a priest!
I'm a regular person. I'm a normal guy. But at the same time, we have to do something. We have to be constrained by compassion, by goodness, by mercy, by truth. These are the values that we have to build our society around. This is how we are challenged to bring these gifts into being. I grew up in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and the church I attended was in suburban Alabama, and I grew up in rural Alabama, pretty far from a lot of things. I think that people have seen the wickedness that is happening in this country, and they don't like it. A majority of people, a super majority of people. I'm not a guy who thought he would find himself at protests or doing the sort of things that I'm doing. But for me, the gospel is really important. This relationship that I have with Jesus is so important to me, and it tells me how I'm supposed to act in the world. And so when I open Scripture and I look and I read and I understand that whatever we do for the least of these is what Scripture says in Matthew 25. Whatever we do for people who are in prison, it says, whatever we do for people who need a cold cup of water, whatever we do for people who are sick is what we do for Jesus. And whatever we don't do for those people is what we don't do for Jesus. So the most vulnerable people amongst us, the people who need us the most to show up, are Jesus. And we'll be judged by that. The Matthew 25 is not just some sort of rosy, like, oh, these people are the most beloved of God. It is, we will be judged by our actions to these people. Jesus is being stolen off our streets and packed into a van by an officer with his face completely covered and with absolutely no civil liberties and absolutely no due process rights given. Jesus is being denied a lawyer in these facilities and medication and spiritual care and a whole host of things. But whatever we do or don't do about this situation is what we're do or don't do for Jesus. We're changing the way we think about ourselves as citizens and how we think about our country and what we're supposed to be doing. To me, that feels very 1930s Germany. Right now, ICE functions basically in the same capacity as the brown shirts. They're a paramilitary organization that is recruiting actively from people with neo-Nazi views and Christian nationalist views. They use Bible verses, by the way, to recruit these ICE agents, which is deeply offensive to me. It's completely blasphemous, but they do it because they're trying to appeal, again, to these Christian nationalists, these folks who want to see a white Christian America.
Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And he will go for us." And I said, "Here am I, send me."
They're allowed to operate with impunity. The ICE agent who shot Renee Good, they can't hold him accountable because the federal government is the one doing the investigation, and they've iced out the state.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. Show your face.
Basically, they promise a blank slip to sadists who can do evil acts and promise they won't be held accountable.
Out of the mall.
Making people who want to fight against it afraid for themselves too. The tear gassing of entire neighborhoods with impunity, the use of these chemical munitions. This is not what a federal government agency should be doing. We have civil liberties and we have civil rights, and that includes undocumented immigrants in this country. But there has been a real systematic attempt to erode those rights. And I know what my religion says about that. I read in the gospel and I understand very clearly that perfect love casts out perfect fear. Fear is the enemy. The number one command throughout Scripture is do not be afraid. So when I see somebody who is consciously cultivating fear and making fear the name of the game, the biggest weapon in the arsenal, I know that the Scripture and the gospel and Christianity and every religion is squarely opposed to that. That cannot be the way that we run this country. We have ways of being that we have talked about in our founding documents and that we've been wrestling with for decades, and we've never quite lived up to them. I'm never saying we've reached those ideals. But what we're doing now is actively destroying those ideals. We're actively recreating a country into something that's totally and radically different. And for me, that is something that is both terrifying and it moves me to act. You have to bring some sort of resistance to such a thing, or your grandkids are going to wake up and ask you, what were you doing? How are you going to allow that?
Pablo Moreno Gonzalez told the court he was held in a cell with an estimate of at least 150 people. There were no beds or blankets, no access to hand soap, showers, or hygiene products.
He said that, quote, the guards were violent and abusive, and that officers hit people who asked for more food or water.
Statistics came out recently that said that folks in the Broadview ICE processing center self-deported at rates 3 to 4 times other processing centers. So we know that what was going on was torture. It was not simply, oh, it was overcrowded. That, to me, is the biggest and most egregious thing that's going on right now. That these things can be operated with our blessing and with our dollars, which is really important to know that our taxes are contributing to the torture that goes on in that facility. We know that people die in these facilities. November 14th, that was the biggest gathering of clergy that had been down at Broadview that I had witnessed and that everybody had witnessed. And it was people from not only all different faiths, but also more conservative clergy showed up there. We had a wonderful worship service, basically the best interfaith service that I've ever been to.
We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We will dance for liberation.
And then several of the clergy, me included, decided to take our demands to see the folks in Broadview, and so we stepped down the street to do that. We did not even get into the street hardly before we were met with intense violence from police. And that was an intentional act to sort of make sure that we could not use our First Amendment rights.
Let's not do what? Let's go! The urbanization of that facility is illegal! It's ridiculous!
I was so naive. I legitimately thought that the folks in clergy collars and the fact that we were all religious leaders in some way would give them some pause before using that sort of level of violence.
Turn around! Turn around! Turn around!
I was real shook up by it, honestly.
This is wrong. I'm here because there's torture in that facility. It's a concentration camp, and because my conscience calls me to do it. What's happening here is evil.
We go out with our hands not clenched in fists, but our hands open in prayer. That is how we approach this. And we go out with the understanding that we carry some moral force with us.
I'm proud of what I believe in.
The police officers there, they know that torture's going on, and they're going to protect it. That's the decision they've made to be there. That is not without a lot of ambivalence, because I've made several police officers cry before. When they consider what's going on in that facility, I ask them, do you have kids? You know, imagine if you were locked up in that facility and you couldn't see your kids. Imagine if your kid was taken from you and you didn't know where they were. So I talk to police officers a lot because they're human beings and they have choices to make. And one of the choices, of course, can be, I want to get this paycheck, and so I'm willing to violate your civil liberties, and I'm willing to make sure the torture goes on unimpeded there. Another choice to make is to save your soul and quit your job.
Holy shit! Oh my God! Oh!
It's corrosive to the soul. It's not something that you can ever wash off. We all have choices. We all have ways we can be in the world. If that's the choice that they're making, it's really important they understand it as a volition, something that's willed. When I went down to Broadview the first time, I was choked by an ICE officer and struck with a truncheon. And then that same officer told me that Jesus said to follow the law. That's such an interesting statement. That is probably the most intriguing theological statement that we've got. The irony of that is Jesus was executed by the Roman state. They said that it was unlawful to heal people. It was unlawful to do what he did. Of course, we know Christians are trained to be able to see through the lies of the state, that Jesus wasn't a criminal. Jesus was the Son of God. There have always been tyrants. If we read the gospel story, we see the pages littered with tyrants and rulers who are do-nothings and ne'er-do-wells, and there have always been those who refuse to give them what they want. Scripture and the church and all these places, they're supposed to be where you're able to ask the most intense and most important questions about meaning, about life, about death, about it all. My fundamentalist Baptist church in rural Alabama kind of taught me how to ask those questions and how to engage with Scripture in that way. I'm very thankful. We see actually all the time in conservative sort of religious spaces that empathy is sort of a new dirty word. It's talked about as a sin.
Hi, I'm Douglas Wilson, and this is an introduction to the sin of empathy.
Empathy almost needs to be struck from the Christian vocabulary.
It does.
Empathy
yes.
is dangerous. Empathy is toxic. Empathy will align you with hell.
Absolutely.
It's a spiritual sickness that we have in this country. We have people who are replacing the gospel, replacing these sorts of ideas about mercy or forgiveness or about truth, and they're replacing them with other ideas about selfishness, about greed, about being able to hurt as many people as possible and get away with it. And I think that we really have to reckon with the logics that led us to this place. We have to really build a country in which we take each other seriously and that we care about each other.
He cared so deeply for this country and for the values that everyone here shares, regardless of political affiliation.
The night is darkest right before the dawn. I think that we are going to be able to find some way out of this. It's going to get really bad, though. If people think that we are going to get out of this with a midterm election or election in 4 years, they're wrong. This has been a crisis that's decades in the making, and now we're going to have to take some time to be able to extricate ourselves from that. Honestly, we've got to have some accountability. I don't know what American Nuremberg looks like, but the people who commit these crimes have to face some accountability. I don't believe we'll be able to move on without it. I know that there will be plenty of people who say we need to heal, but Scripture's very clear about that. In Jeremiah, it says, "You heal the wound of my people lightly, crying peace, peace, but there is no peace." And I think that we are going to have to actually heal the wound of this people, not lightly, but firmly. And I think that that's going to be a big task that we have to undertake. How we overcome evil is we overcome it with good. And how you practice goodness in this present age is through that nonviolent commitment, is through those hands open in prayer, is through the belief, no matter how dismal it might seem, that there is a new day coming. And if you have that belief and you have those hands open in prayer, then I think anything can be possible.